Okay, hey, good morning, everyone. And really a gift to follow someone like Mitch Albom and come off of that message. I said early on, and my name is Mark Thomas. I'm the principal at Northview High School in Grand Rapids. 32 years as an educator now, 27 as an administrator. I started as a young administrator. I am certainly no longer that. I'm a past president of MASSP and really pleased to join all of you, but ironically, a former English teacher. And 27 years ago, my class of somewhat incorrigible kids who hated English, and the principal gave them all to me, never wanted to read anything. So I introduced Tuesdays with Maury. And they started to read it in class. I called Mitch Albom, who has a radio show in Detroit. He called me back the next day. And I invited him to come, and he goes, Mark, I would love to, but I am so busy, I cannot do that. But he goes, you know what? I've been invited by the Ladies Literary Guild in Grand Rapids to come speak about the book. Would you like to bring your class? And would you like to introduce me? And I did that. And it was so nice of him. He took time with my class. He gave them autographed copies. And I introduced him and I said, you know, the one student who hated to read, I said, why do you like to read this? He goes, Mr. Thomas, it's the only book that doesn't suck. It talks about real life. And he said it's one of the best reviews he's ever had for one of his books. So I'm sure he doesn't remember that, but all those students and I certainly do. And he does a marvelous job. But happy to have all of you join today. And I'm very pleased that a dear friend of mine is joining us, Dr. Greg Dale from Duke University. And as a young administrator, I didn't know what I was doing. And one of the things I was able to do was read an article by Greg on credible coaching. I was a former, teacher, coach, athletic director, but it applied to leadership across the board. I called Greg. We spent 45 or 50 minutes on the phone, and who knew that we would become dear friends and our families would vacation together over the years. And we've done a lot together. So I'm really, really pleased to welcome Greg today to join us. He's an international expert on leadership and credible leadership. And he also at Duke is the head of peak performance and shared. He runs the leadership programs there. So Greg is joining us as well. So just really pleased to join all of you today to talk a little bit about these times. Greg, I'll turn it over to you just for a minute. Introduce yourself.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Mark. Hey, good morning, everyone. I love the state of Michigan. I've been there many, many times and vacationed there, spoken at several schools, and it's an awesome place. So I'm excited to get to spend some time with you guys. As Mark said, I'm a former teacher and middle school teacher and a coach. I coached in New York City, and then I'm from Texas originally and taught in inner city San Antonio there for a couple of years. And so I really have a heart for trying to help teachers, coaches, parents, administrators create an environment and a culture where kids can be successful. And today we just want to try to give you guys some food for thought. We'd love to have some interaction here. This is a workshop, so we'd love to have some interaction, and you guys would certainly be doing that in breakout rooms or actually in tables if we had you. We won't necessarily do breakout rooms today, but we'd love for you to interact as we begin to go through this and ask you some questions. I want you to really just self-reflect and think about where you are as a leader and some of the challenges that you guys have faced. And hopefully we'll give you at least one thing that you guys can use that'll help you a little bit further along in your journey as a leader and teacher. So I'm going to go ahead and begin by sharing the screen. I'm going to let Mark kind of start us off here at the beginning, and then I'm going to chime in, and then I'll certainly wrap up here. Okay. So we have some points here, and Mark, I'll let you take this piece of it here, and I'll let you go here.
Sure, and I'm speaking from my own experience. I'm speaking from spending time with my colleagues in the West Michigan area, and I'm sure that I'm trying to have empathy for all of you. But one of the things we talked about is leadership in uncertain times, and we've certainly be able to speak to that over the course of the last 8 or 9 months. And it really does speak, at least what I've felt in myself and my wife is an elementary principal and through colleagues, is uncertain times accentuate the importance of leadership. It really shines a light on leadership, and it really shines a light on decisions. Crises, obstacles, and change can be incendiary accelerants of human emotions. Those increased human emotions put added pressure on leaders. Now, we know in our buildings, and it's that old concept about the amygdala hijack. When people go into their emotional windows, all of a sudden they're not thinking rationally anymore. And you know, if you've dealt with challenged students or you've dealt with challenged adults, but remember the political climate we've lived in for the last X amount of years. Remember all of these different things and how polarized our country has been. And now here we are as educational leaders, and education is one of those, really hot topics when it comes to debate. I don't know about you, but I've had a number of parents, on the phone tell me there's no, pandemic going on. We shouldn't have to wear masks. I've had others that are just the opposite and a bunch in between. So I know right now that just on top of the work that we do that can be so challenging, all these other factors have, I think, created this additional pressure and created this additional, angst and put more onus on us as leaders to have us determine how we handle that. And for me as a leader, how do I explain that to my stakeholders to aid me along the way? How do I try to take the time to explain the environment and the environment that is going to make them feel a different way than maybe before, or it's going to impact our parents, or it's going to impact our students, and it's not going to be a normal situation? Because one of the things that we have to do is we have to kind of diagnose that environment. We have to be able to manage that environment no matter what the weather is or what the conditions are. So one of the things that I wanted to kind of check in with some of you, and Greg and I wanted to ask you, what situations of increased or heightened emotion, stress, or anxiety have you observed during the current school year? So whether, if someone wants to, pipe in and on their microphone, or if they want to add into the chat, but what are some of these areas maybe for some of you that you have certainly noticed that it's not business as usual, and these are things that have really created a heightened level of angst and anxiety for me as a building administrator, as a school leader?
Hi, my name's Allison Traub. I teach high school. I'm actually teaching in a virtual program currently. I find myself spending a lot of time, actually the majority of my time, doing paperwork and busy work, something along those lines, rather than actually connecting with my students or working with them on any kind of work, really. So I feel like a paper pusher these days.
Allison, thank you too. I think one of the things, and somebody else, Kim just mentioned this, but this whole concept of all of a sudden being thrust into virtual teaching. And the fact that I know for me, I have one staff member who is 70 years old, and none of you could keep up with her. She gets up at 4:30 and does her Beachbody workout. She just got her doctorate at 68. She's the head of my English department, but her frustration is in the fact that she misses that connection to kids in that regard, and this virtual teaching. We just adopted a new learning platform this year. So it's a great point in the fact that our efficacy and how we feel about ourselves as professionals. My most veteran teachers now question themselves because they don't feel as comfortable in Zooms or in Google Hangouts or on, a learning platform as they did back what they were doing. And I'm sure it goes the same way. Some other comments I want to go back to: helping staff through a pandemic fatigue, continuous change in procedure and expectations, the social profession that goes on. I think teaching, at least for me, it's that lack of physical connection. I miss the high fives and the fist bumps as I walk down the hallway. Teachers having to learn the virtual platform while having to teach, support families, encourage others while having to support their own children at home. How many of you have had just parents who are lost and frustrated and don't know what to do? And then they express that emotion and that frustration to you as well. Helping staff through pandemic fatigue. Unable to settle into a rhythm before the status quo changes again. Feeling in a constant state of transition. Teachers not feeling competent with the technology. We're about to go back 100% face-to-face and just got all the desks back in our room. My students are experiencing an extreme amount of anxiety just seeing how many people are going to be in the room. Little things that have felt like big things. Greg, I'm going to let you have a shot at some of this too.
Yeah. I'm just reading through the chat here, and you guys are answering this question, the impact that it's had on you guys. And, we certainly feel it here. I'm a professor. I teach a class here and work every day with our kids. And our student athletes are tested 7 days a week. They are live in a bubble. They're not allowed to hang out with anyone else outside of their group. They take all their classes virtually. I teach my class virtually. And I can only imagine having to do that 5 or 6 times a day, and do it a hybrid model. Or I noticed that someone talked about how when you guys are coming back 100% and all the desks are back in the room, and people are really anxious about that. And the fact that there's going to be so many people around now when they're not used to having that, and they're anxious about that. And, we typically feel anxiety when we beat ourselves up about something that happened in the past, or we worry about the unknown future. And there's so much about this that's unknown. And I'm sure for you guys, how many times have you said, I don't know? And that phrase, as leaders, you guys are supposed to, and teachers are supposed to have some of the answers, and many of them, certainly not all of them. But I know that it's frustrating when you continually don't know, and it's hard. And that's part of the reason why people are so anxious about this. I want to move on to this next piece here, and I'm going to speak to it briefly, and then Mark, you can certainly speak to it. That during this time, more than ever, your credibility is really going to come into play. And I want you to think about whether you're a teacher in the classroom or you're an administrator, wherever you are, your success as a leader comes down to the credibility that you have with whichever group that you're working with and leading. And credibility is like a bank account, and you're either making deposits into that or you're making withdrawals from that. And there's a difference between credible leaders, credible teachers, and coercive teachers. And coercive ones, as you can see here, foster an environment based on isolation, alienation, hierarchical power, and distrust. What do you think credible leaders, what type of environment do they foster? Now, you can't just say all the opposites of what we just said there, but what are some things that come to mind when you think about, particularly around the anxiety of all the things that are going on here, and the frustrations and the challenges that are going on in where we are now? How do credible leaders, what do they do to create, and what type of environment do they create? I'd love to hear from some of you. Yes, relationships, appreciation, they're transparent. Yes, good.
They listen, they encourage. They're okay with saying, I don't know, but I want to learn and figure it out. Stability, making sure that staff is heard, valued, and respected. So the key really is to think about, so how do you do that? What are some of the ways that you actually do that? So you guys are right in line with what we're saying here, is that you foster an environment based on dignity. And, we're not going to really get into this today, but Donna Hicks wrote a really good book called Leading with Dignity. And I want you guys to, she talks about the difference that we talk about dignity and respect like they're the same thing, and they are very different. And she talks about how respect is something that you earn, and it's something that has to be earned at some level, but dignity is something that we're all born with. And that's a challenging thing, particularly when you've lost respect for someone based on how they behave, based on their actions, based on how they interact with you, their decisions that they make. How do you still treat them with dignity? And I think credible leaders have the ability certainly to do that. Collaboration and trust, like you guys talked about as well there. Greg, one thing too, I think it's important because as administrators or as teachers, there's going to be times when you have another colleague or maybe an administrator that you just don't care for. Someone that you would not be friends with or not want to hang out with. But it's that whole concept of dignity is different than respect. An advice I got early on in my career is how can you turn potential adversaries into advocates? For a long time, I did not want to work with those people. I would try to avoid them when I had to learn over time. I have to go find a way to be able to build a relationship. Even though I might not want to hang out with this person, I need to be able to find a way to understand from their lens and try to build some sort of relationship, because those can be that kind of pebble in your shoe all the time when you think about it, or that frustration point. Greg?
Yeah, Stacy asked to share the name of that book again. It's Donna Hicks, and the book is Leading with Dignity. It's a great piece, and I've shared that with a few schools where I've gone and spoken, and people have adopted that within their schools, and really having that kind of as a theme for how we're going to treat each other, how we're going to interact with each other, how we're going to deal with people, and differentiate between respect and dignity, and helping people understand that we all are born with dignity. We all deserve to be treated that way. So it's a great resource for you guys. Thanks for
that. Also aligns with PBS and conflict resolution as well. She speaks to conflict resolution often in that book.
Yeah. Thanks, Nikki, for that reference there. It's in the chat if you haven't seen that. And as the last point here, real quickly, is we'd say that credible leadership is an ensemble performance rather than solo act. That it's an ongoing, daily, everything, every aspect of what you're doing. And it's, again, I want you to be thinking about how it's a bank account. It's like a bank account. It's your credibility account. And what are you doing to make deposits into that, to get people to buy into what you're trying to get them to do? Because during times like this, it's even more challenging than ever. If they don't believe you're credible, then it's going to be more challenging for them to want to follow and do what you're asking them to do. So people, definitely, we want people following, and we want people to buy into what we're trying to get them to do. But there's also this piece about handling criticism. Mark, you want to start off with this, and then I'll kind of jump in here with you.
Yeah. So for me, and I'll give you a personal example. I'm a verbal thinker, and Greg knows this about me because he gave me a PDP, personality profile, and I verbally think and work through and navigate in that. But at some point, after a level of frustration, my modality is verbal attack when I finally get frustrated enough and go through different things. And if I look at that, I stay quiet for a long time about my frustration, but then it builds up. And for me, I've had to learn over time that, no matter what, whether it be coaching or leading or anything we do, that you're going to have people that are going to criticize, and they're going to not agree with what you do. There's going to be armchair quarterbacks. I call also the snipers from the grassy knoll. There's going to be people that smile and nod yes at you, and they see you in the hallway, and then go into the teacher's lounge and say, Mark is so stupid. I don't believe he wants us to do that. And it happens. And the same thing, people also who are, I call them opinions, walking opinions, who are seeking an issue. They just like to be able to, rile things up and do that. And so in our situations, how do we navigate and understand that comes with the territory that we signed up for? And how do we work through that process in order to understand, first of all, that it's going to happen, and then how can we be reflective, and who do we listen to? Because it can't just be a solo act. It's got to be something where we have some support as well. So, Greg?
Yeah, so I'd love to put it out to you guys, and whether it's in the chat or verbally, because we talked about one of the things we missed is that connection. So I'd love for some of you to speak up, but certainly in the chat as well. What are your thoughts about this? How do you handle this criticism, and think about your credibility and maintaining that as you do that? Love to hear from some of you. How do we handle this inevitable criticism? And many of you faced it for sure, particularly during these times. What's the best way to handle that?
This is Vicki McCusker from Bullet Creek Schools in Midland, Michigan. I think it's funny that you use the word snipers, because we use that term around here as well sometimes. But one of the things I have found is sometimes looking at the cause of where they're coming from. We have a specific staff member here who very much is like that, likes to kind of come at you real quick. And I've learned that it's coming from her own anxiety. So once I start to then I don't become so defensive immediately. And I'm trying to then address whatever needs she might have as to why she's coming at me that way. Now, I haven't figured out all of the snipers in my building, but that one I have figured out.
Yes.
So
Very
Vicki,
good.
that's one of those seek first to understand, then to be understood. Very good sharing. Thank you.
Yeah. And that leads into some of the things that we'll talk about here in a minute. So thank you, Vicki. Aaron says there's a growth opportunity with criticism when reflecting on the statements. Oftentimes there's some things that if done differently could have avoided the speed bumps. Absolutely. But that takes, I think there's an evolution as a leader, and that takes some growth on your part. That takes some, you're confident enough in yourself to be willing to do that and look at that criticism as a growth opportunity, as opposed to being defensive right away. Good. Yeah. What's a lie? What are they really communicating? Where's that coming from? What's the real thing, the real reason why they're doing that? Yes. Very good.
I would jump in and say that, in these situations, people will support what they help to build. And so as you involve people, you give people a say, you give them ownership, you start to develop trust and relationships through collaboration and communication. And then I think as you get into some of these types of situations, being careful on how you're reacting, as you're really listening, if you're having even like meetings with folks like this, listening, pausing, paraphrasing back to them, and then starting to work through some of that communication through those angles.
Yes.
Corey, you've been trained in cognitive coaching, I bet.
Yes.
So it's very good work by you in that area. But that also speaks to Corey discussing that whole concept of emotional intelligence, and that's that high emotional IQ of being able to understand why is someone having this reaction and what else might be going on. We always talk about, we see the tip of the iceberg with kids and staff when they have an emotional response. Can we get underneath that water level and see all that's underneath there and find out what some of those other causes are that might be, generating that comes up?
This is Trish Pelkey. I'm in Howell, Michigan. I'm a middle school principal, and I probably have a different perspective because we have been face-to-face every day, all kids, since middle of August.
I've literally been in hell, Trish.
All kids every day. We have a virtual option that some kids have chosen, but that is separate from our in-person. So the criticism from parents is the lowest it's actually ever been because they're so thankful that we are open. But my staff is overwhelmed. That's been, difficult because the fatigue of also being here every day and the new demands, a new platform, like someone said, everything is moving so fast. So I think one of the things that we have been working on our leadership team is controlling the narrative. And I think that that's really important.
Exactly. That's what you all do.
Yeah. My superintendent's actually shadowing a tough kid here on Thursday. And it's something that we're working on. And so I went to those teachers when I had picked the student and explained, what his purpose was, what we were all shadowing some at-risk students and why I've chosen this and what the purpose is. As we talk about resources, he needs to see this. And I went to each one of those teachers because if I didn't control that narrative, it would have gone so south so fast because they are at their breaking point. So we've really talked about, what's an email and what is a conversation, and then how are we controlling the narrative is part of people understanding why we're making a decision that we're making. The decisions are flying fast and furious. So controlling about the understanding of the why behind it has really helped to keep my building calm in a difficult situation, as calm as it can be. But I have many staff that are on the breaking point, as we all do.
Yeah.
So Trish, one thing too, folks, and schools are notorious for not doing this as well, and I'm glad you bring this up. The whole concept of marketing and communications and being proactive communicators in order to control that narrative. Businesses have their own marketing departments. They have people dedicated to that. It's rare. Normally that falls on administrators or leaders in those buildings to try to do that. And to have that empathic, piece that Trish is talking about with her staff or with her parents and kids, but controlling that marketing and communications And Greg will speak a little bit to the why, as this is one of his areas, and it'll come up here a little bit as well.
Yeah. So I want to thank you all for sharing those, and I hope you'll continue to share some of those in the chat. We have a couple of videos we want to show you today. And one, Brene Brown, many of you have read some of her work, have seen some of her work around courage and vulnerability and shame. And she, just a short 5-minute piece here about how she has learned how to handle criticism. So would love for you guys to, and you're gonna have to let me know if you can see the screen, because I'm gonna have to stop sharing and come back. But let's see. Can you guys see the screen or no? Or can you see the video?
My story is that
No.
I'm a researcher and
No.
I never thought I would have a
Okay.
big public
Hold on.
career.
I'm gonna stop sharing and then share again.
Make sure you select include computer sound too.
Okay.
There we go.
Can you hear it
And
now?
so
Yes.
I did a TED Talk that
Yes.
went very viral. And in the wake of that, I was kind of everywhere for a couple of months on every CNN.com, NPR. It was everywhere, and something I wasn't used to. And the marching orders from my therapist and my husband were, do not read the comments online. So I read all the comments online. And so one morning I woke up and there were 2 or 3 new articles out, and I started reading the comments. And they were devastating. They weren't about my work, they were about me. They were super personal. And they were the things that creative people play in their mind and then give up doing what they really want to do. Like if I asked every single one of you, what would you try if you knew people would never say this about you? What would this be? Those were the comments that morning. Of course she embraces imperfection. What choice does she have? Look how she looks. I feel sorry for her kids. Less research, more Botox. Just mean personal attacks, the things that really, up until that moment, had inspired me to stay very small in my life and my career, just so I could avoid those things. So that morning, Steve and the kids leave. I stay home. I get on the couch and I watch 8 hours of Downton Abbey. And when it's over, I don't want to turn off Downton Abbey. Because the minute you turn off Downton Abbey, then it's like soccer practice and dinner and back to the mean people. And maybe, should I get Botox? And maybe if I stand still when I talk. So I get out my laptop and I do a search for who was president in the United States during the Downton Abbey era. Have you ever done that? Like you're numbing with TV or a movie, and so when it's over, you just like stay in that space by like learning more about the actors and what's going on. I've been doing this long enough to know that this is like, you're laughing with me, not at me. So I put it in, and Theodore Roosevelt comes up, and a quote comes up. And I read it. And this is what it says. It's a quote from a speech that he gave in the early 1900s at the Sorbonne. And a lot of people call it the Man in the Arena speech. And this is the passage that changes my life. It's not the critic who counts. It's not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles or where the doer of deeds could have done it better. The credit belongs to the person who's actually in the arena, whose face is marred with blood and sweat and dust, who at the best, in the end, knows the triumph of high achievement, and who at worst, if he fails daring greatly. So the moment that I read that, I closed my laptop, and this is what shifted in me. 3 huge things. First, I spent the last 12 years studying vulnerability, and that quote was everything I know about vulnerability. It is not about winning. It's not about losing. It's about showing up and being seen. The second thing, this is who I want to be. I want to create. I want to make things that didn't exist before I touched them. I want to show up and be seen in my work and in my life. And if you're going to show up and be seen, there is only one guarantee, and that is you will get your ass kicked. That is a guarantee. That's the only certainty you have. If you're going to go in the arena and spend any time in there whatsoever, especially if you've committed to creating in your life, you will get your ass kicked. So you have to decide at that moment, I think for all of us, if courage is a value that we hold, this is a consequence. You can't avoid it. The third thing, which really set me free, and I think Steve, my husband, would argue has made me somewhat dangerous, is kind of a new philosophy about criticism, which is this. If you're not in the arena also getting your ass kicked, I'm not interested in your feedback. If you have constructive information, feedback to give me, I want it. And I'm an academic, I'm hardwired for wrestling around with stuff like that. If you say, hey, you forgot all this literature, or hey, you should have done this, or terrible sentence construction over here, like, let's go, let's do it. I love that. But if you're in the cheap seats, not putting yourself on the line and just talking about how I could do it better, I'm in no way interested in your feedback.
So would love to hear from some of you. What do you take from that, and how can you apply that to where you are every day?
So Tracy Wilson from Grand Haven. I will say we've done some of Brene Brown's work as a district leadership team, and if you're not in the arena getting your ass kicked, I don't want to hear your feedback is probably the thing I live by the most. It helps me put in perspective when somebody on the other end of the phone or other end of the email is just complaining. I have to remember that they're in the cheap seats and they don't have a full view of everything that we do, and not get upset or angry about it. I believe feedback is the breakfast of champions, and I do believe that we need to listen always. But do remember that not everybody is willing to step into the arena that we're in every single day.
Right. Yeah. Very good. Yeah. Thank you. Thanks, Tracy. Anyone else?
One other thing you're going to hear from Brene Brown is that vulnerability is a stop on the road to courage. And for all of us, the ability to find places and people that we can be vulnerable with, because it's not the expectation for a leader. And vulnerability, don't confuse vulnerability with weakness. Vulnerability is not weakness. All right. And I know, especially because of my wife, it's different for genders. It can be different for a variety of different things and roles. As a former, high school and college athlete, I was always taught never to show injury, never to show emotion. And I mean, hey, it's got me into counseling with my wife, because she goes, that's not the person I want to be married to. I need to have someone who I can have some conversations with and navigate that. So it does require us to really know ourselves and be able to put ourselves in a position.
And I never thought I would have a big public career.
Sorry, guys.
That's all right.
Sorry, Mark. Sorry. Go ahead.
But I agree. I think we have to be very mindful and be self-aware with that, and Greg, please go ahead with some of the stuff that ties for that.
Yes. Does anyone else have a comment before we move on here? All right. Sorry, I was trying to get the link, and I'll try to get that link so that I can get it to you guys. A couple of people asked for that, so I'll try to get that to you. But I'm going to come back to sharing the screen here, and I want to move on here just for the sake of time, and that hopefully she gave you some ideas about that. And I want to tie in this piece here for you guys about accountability and empathy. And I think as a leader, as a teacher, you have to be able to balance both of these things. And I'd like for you to just pause and reflect for a moment and think about yourself and which of those comes a little more naturally for you. Is it the accountability piece, or is it the empathy piece? And I think both of those are, some people would argue you're either born with empathy or the ability to demonstrate empathy or not. And I would argue you can improve your empathy skills. You can improve your ability to demonstrate empathy. And just like you can improve your ability to hold people accountable. It might not always come naturally to you or be the first thing you think about, or but you got to be able to do both. So just a couple of things for you to think about. You need to have high standards. You have to be demanding. You have to hold everyone accountable, right? But I also think that you have to be willing to have authentic conversations. So as a leader, be careful about bringing your whole staff together and saying, hey, we all need to get better at this. And everyone's looking at each other like, what is she talking about? Everyone kind of knows you're really talking about two teachers or one individual, but you don't have the ability to go and hold that person accountable, to have that authentic conversation with that individual and say, this is something that that you've got to improve on. And here's how I can help you. And we're going to work on that together, however you can do that. But I just think you start to lose a little credibility with people if you continually bring everyone together because you have a hard time individualizing those conversations where they need to be taking place. And ultimately, you guys got to be able to get results. You are held to that, and you have to be able to get results. So how about this? Does that come natural for you? Are you pretty good at that? Having high standards, holding everyone accountable, being demanding. And remember, you can be demanding without demeaning. You can be demanding without undermining dignity. You can do all those things. But on the other piece, the other side of this is the empathy piece. And I would argue some of us, and empathy definitely comes a little easier for me than the accountability piece. I've really had to work on that. But some of us are so empathetic, perhaps, that we get taken advantage of at times. It's a balancing act. You guys, a couple of you have mentioned this, and Brene talks about this too, but the difference between empathy and pity or sympathy. And sympathy is, wow, I really feel bad for you. That stinks for you. I'm so sorry. Empathy is obviously your ability to try to put yourself in someone else's shoes, to try to feel their pain, so to speak. What do you guys think about this? I'd love to hear some comments on this, either through the text or the chat or verbally, that we're more naturally to feel empathy for people who act like us, look like us, and think like us. Do you agree? Do you disagree? What are your thoughts?
Have some of you noticed the challenge as a leader or a colleague with staff members who feel overwhelmed, who need to be validated for the fact that, like I know my guidance counselors having to go schedule, 2 hybrid cohorts and going back and forth, or other teachers and so forth. I've spent more time trying to work on being empathic without just apologizing for things, but trying to say, I understand, and, how can I help you move forward? But that's been a definite challenge for me this year in growth.
Anyone else?
Yeah, I would say this, Cara Burke, I'm actually a school counselor.
Okay.
And absolutely, it's a natural bias. It's a human reaction to be able to more easily empathize with someone who we view or perceive to be more like us. But it's a skill and something that we need to work on to, excuse me, to empathize with others. We have to be able to do that. And others need to be able to sense that ability in us, or at least be able to sense that we want to do that, and have that be genuine. If people sense disingenuousness, that's going to do more damage with the relationship than just the fact that we maybe don't understand or don't empathize, but would like to.
Yes.
So the fact that we need to be able to recognize when we don't, but that we genuinely want to.
Right.
But it's just human nature. It's a natural bias to more easily and quickly empathize with someone that we perceive to be more like us. We just need to work on it.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, very good, Haley, about Marshall Rosenberg's work. And you know, we might not be able to relate to the experience that someone had, but we can relate to the emotion, perhaps, or the impact of. We can relate to disappointment. We can relate to bias. We can relate to. I like to tell the story. I grew up in a really small town in southern Texas, and I've lived in rural Texas and rural Alaska. That's where I spent my childhood. But in Texas, it was a big deal for us to be able to go into town, in this little town close by where we lived. And several years ago, one of my buddies and I, who we're still friends today, were talking about this. And he said, you know, Greg, I bet you never went into one of those stores and had somebody follow you around the whole time. And I was like, yeah, what are you talking about? I never even thought about that. He said, well, I never really talked about this, but someone followed me every single time we went into one of those stores. Well, see, this guy's, he's African-American, he's Black. I don't have any idea as a white male what it's like to grow up in South Texas in a rural community and being Black and having that experience, right? It's hard, it's difficult when we come from different backgrounds, when we come from a different place, a different perspective. I would argue, though, that we can show compassion. And compassion shows that you care and you want to help in some way. You want to listen. You want to be there and show that you want to perhaps maybe not even try to solve it for them, but you're willing to listen. And I think it's really important that, yeah, you got to think about, I'm talking particularly about your coworkers here, that they want to succeed. That impacts your ability to be empathetic or compassionate. If we assume that, for instance, a generation of people that are younger than us are entitled and they don't have a great work ethic, then boy, it's going to be really hard for you. We make those types of generalizations all the time about different races, different socioeconomic status, different aspects of our culture. We make these sweeping generalizations about people, and it makes it really challenging for us to demonstrate that empathy and compassion. And
so Greg, one thing too, folks, that I used this year in regards to that was Ryan Holiday has a book called The Obstacle is the Way. And it talks about the Stoics. And the Stoics go back to the Greek philosophers, and they talk about the fact that nothing is good or bad. It is what it is. And no matter what, if there's an obstacle, the path is we have to go to the obstacle. We have to find a way. And so it's that balancing. I've been using that to say we have to control what we can control. We can't control the pandemic. We can't control how certain people feel, but we can control various things about this building or about our attitudes and such. And then that whole concept has helped very much kind of let me kind of understand what they're trying to feel, but also with that concept, but we still move forward. We still find a way to innovate, create, find a way to move forward and do that, and trying to split that balance.
Yes. Another video we'd like to show you a portion of. Some of you have seen some of Simon Sinek's work, and he has a really good piece. I'm only going to show you about 5 minutes of a piece around empathy. He's obviously talking to a corporate group, but I think several of the things he talks about absolutely apply to where you guys are every day. So I want you to think about how it applies to you. And I am going to probably have to stop sharing and show you a few minutes.
And leadership is a skill like any other. It is a practicable, learnable skill. And it is something that you work on. It's like a muscle. If you practice it all the days, you will get good at it. You will become a strong leader. If you stop practicing, you will become a weak leader. Like parenting, everyone has the capacity to be a parent. Doesn't mean everybody wants to be a parent, and doesn't mean everybody should be a parent. Leadership is the same. We all have the capacity to be a leader. Doesn't mean everybody should be a leader, and it doesn't mean everybody wants to be a leader. And the reason is because it comes at great personal sacrifice. Remember, you're not in charge, you're responsible for those in your charge. That means things like when everything goes right, you have to give away all the credit. And when everything goes wrong, you have to take all the responsibility. That sucks, right? It's things like staying late to show somebody what to do. It's things like when something does actually break, when something goes wrong, instead of yelling and screaming and taking over, you say, try again. When the overwhelming pressures are not on them, the overwhelming pressures are on us. At the end of the day, great leaders are not responsible for the job. They're responsible for the people who are responsible for the job. They're not even responsible for the results. I love talking to CEOs and say, what's your priority? And they put their hands on their hips so proudly and say, my priority is my customer. I'm like, really? You haven't talked to a customer in 15 years. There's no CEO on the planet responsible for the customer. They're just not. They're responsible for the people who are responsible for the people who are responsible for the customer. I'll tell you a true story. A few months ago, I stayed at the Four Seasons in Las Vegas. It is a wonderful hotel. And the reason it's a wonderful hotel is not because of the fancy beds. Any hotel can go and buy a fancy bed. The reason it's a wonderful hotel is because of the people who work there. If you walk past somebody at the Four Seasons and they say hello to you, you get the feeling that they actually wanted to say hello to you. It's not that somebody told them that you have to say hello to all the customers, say hello to all the guests, right? You actually feel that they care. Now, in their lobby, they have a coffee stand. And one afternoon, I went to buy a cup of coffee, and there was a barista by the name of Noah who was serving me. Noah was fantastic. He was friendly and fun, and he was engaging with me. And I had so much fun buying a cup of coffee, I actually think I gave 100% tip, right? He was wonderful. So as is my nature, I asked Noah, do you like your job? And without skipping a beat, Noah says, I love my job. And so I followed up. I said, what is it that the Four Seasons is doing that would make you say to me, I love my job? And without skipping a beat, Noah said, throughout the day, managers will walk past me and ask me how I'm doing, if there's anything that I need to do my job better. He said, not just my manager, any manager. And then he said something magical. He says, I also work at Caesar's Palace. And at Caesar's Palace, the managers are trying to make sure we're doing everything right. They catch us when we do things wrong. He says, when I go to work there, I like to keep my head under the radar and just get through the day so I can get my paycheck. He says, here at the Four Seasons, I feel I can be myself. Same person, entirely different experience from the customer who will engage with Noah. So we in leadership are always criticizing the people. We're always saying, we got to get the right people on the bus. I got to fill my team. I got to get the right people. But the reality is it's not the people, it's the leadership. If we create the right environment, we will get people like Noah at the Four Seasons. If we create the wrong environment, we will get people like Noah at Caesar's Palace. It's not the people. And yet we're so quick to hire and fire. You can't hire and fire your children. If your kids are struggling, we don't say, you got to see at school, you're up for adoption. So why is it that when somebody has performance problems at work, why is it that our instinct is to say, you're out? We do not practice empathy. What does empathy look like? Here's the lack of empathy. This is normal in our business world. You walk into someone's office, someone walks into our office and says, your numbers have been down for the third quarter in a row. You have to pick up your numbers, otherwise I can't guarantee what the future will look like. How inspired do you think that person is to come to work the next day? Here's what empathy looks like. You walk into someone's office, someone walks into your office and says, your numbers are down for the third quarter in a row. Are you okay? I'm worried about you. What's going on? We all have performance issues. Maybe someone's kid is sick. Maybe they're having problems in their marriage. Maybe one of their parents is dying. We don't know what's going on in their lives. And of course, it will affect performance at work. Empathy is being concerned about the human being, not just their output. We have, for some reason.
So a couple comments, anything that you took from what Simon had to say in terms of how you might apply it to where you are?
I just want to say that's so absolutely true. And I think about leaders that I've worked under in comparison to, that is directly related to the atmosphere of where I've worked, whether it's at a hospital or an outpatient setting or in a school. And directly speaking to schools, you see it in the student body, the sense of community that the school has. And that's the kind of leader that I want to be.
Yes.
That's just spot on. You see it over and over again. It's absolutely spot on.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I would argue that the culture within your staff is a reflection on you guys and your leadership. The reflection in the culture within the classroom and the engagement there is a reflection on the leadership within that classroom at some level. We have to take some ownership of that.
You know, one thing too, and one of the things I use and I've used for a few years is the term permission to be human. You know, we're in a human relations business. And, you know, we expect the adults to check all their emotional baggage and everything else at the front door and walk in and be exactly the same every day. And I tell you what, we all face challenges at times. And so to be able to really truly be seen at work and to know your people at work and what they need. And it doesn't mean that we need to fix everything all the time because we're cut like that many times, but just to listen and just to validate someone and let them be seen. And we also call our system here compassion and accountability, you know, in the sense that we care about people unconditionally. We might not like a choice someone makes sometime, but don't confuse that with the fact that we don't like you. Because, you know, kids can walk in and say, you just don't like me, Mr. Dale. Or a teacher might say, you've never liked me. No, I care about you. You know, I have dignity for you. I might not respect every decision you make, or I might not like decisions, but don't confuse that. And that needs clarification often. You have to water and care for and tend to relationships.
So we have one more video and then we're going to wrap this up here. Okay. So, you know, if I were to ask each of you to raise your hand if you have a loved one in your family somewhere, whether it be your immediate or extended family, that is currently ill in some fashion, some of you would raise your hand. If I were to ask you if your financial situation currently isn't exactly where you'd like for it to be, some of you would raise your hand. Are you in a relationship, significant relationship that you wish might be different? Some of you would raise your hand. The reality is that we walk around every day and we all have a story. When those kids walk into that classroom, they have a story. When your teachers walk into that building, when your leadership staff and your crew walks in to that building, everyone has a story. And sometimes we lose sight of that. And maybe some of you have seen this video. I love this. I always share it. I hope you'll share it at your schools. It's under the surface. So let me pull this up. All right, so perhaps many of you have seen that, but I think it's a good reminder of that we all have a story, and everyone responds to this situation that we're in differently. Not everyone responds the way you do. Not everyone. We all have different ways that we deal with these challenging times. I always remember when Kobe Bryant passed away. Several of the players in the NBA who were good friends of his or looked up to him, and they went and played right away because they felt like that was their way to honor him. And some were so shaken by it that they didn't play for several games. And people criticized those people that didn't play because they were so heartbroken that they couldn't play. And they criticized them because they didn't handle it the way they thought they should handle it. It's important to understand that we all have a story and we all have challenges. So for time's sake, I'm going to wrap this up here. You guys got to make sure you refill your emotional bank accounts in this time, and hopefully you have some network. You guys are using it. Hopefully you guys are using each other as colleagues. Hopefully you have a network of people that you can relate to that are in the arena with you and that are in there taking the beating, and you guys can help each other with that. Maybe use this time as opportunity. You guys there's lots of changes that are having to take place, and how you sell those and how you implement those is really important. Again, I think your ability to get people to buy into these changes and to buy into having the right attitude largely comes down to the credibility that you have with them. We didn't talk much about this, but most of what we're talking about here is building emotional equity with people. If people trust that you're coming from a good place, if they trust that it's about them and not about you, if they trust that you care about them, they're going to be more likely to buy into what you're trying to do. And then certainly be honest with yourself and think about which of those comes becomes easier for you, and work to try to improve, to try to balance those two things. So there's my contact information.
So, hey, Greg, real quick too, you guys. And one thing, 2010, Greg was a keynote speaker at the MASSP annual conference on credible leadership when I was the president. So it goes back that far when we started this journey together and so forth. And, Greg works all over the world. Actually, last night at 1:30, Greg, where were you on? What were you doing some work with in the morning?
I was at a school doing some school with a school in Doha.
Yeah, Dubai, all over the country. But I would say I've had Greg here in Northview probably 10 to 12 times. He can work with athletics and parents and coaches. He can work with your staff, a variety of people. So I will give him a plug and say he's just marvelous in these situations. Excellence in Performance is his website. He and I even collaborated on a book. So, and
yes.
I'm happy anytime. I'm happy anytime to, reach out to me, and happy to help you as well. But Greg, go ahead.
Yeah. So look, I hope we gave you guys one thing that you might take to use with along your journey there to help you. If you ever come to Durham, North Carolina, look me up. I'd be happy to show you around. Duke's a great place, and send some of your kids. We need more kids from Michigan down here in Durham. So please look me up if you ever come down here.
Great. Thanks, you guys. Hey, best of luck on the remainder of the school year. And thanks to MASSP as well. Have a wonderful rest of the conference.